It's official. The king of cars has fallen, and the wreckage is more devastating than anyone could have imagined. What started as a routine tax audit has exploded into the most catastrophic celebrity fraud scandal in automotive history. We're talking federal prison time, empire collapse, and a web of deception so twisted it makes Hollywood fiction look tame. Richard Rawlings, the loud-mouthed, beer-chugging face of Gas Monkey Garage, isn't just facing a few years behind bars. He's looking at 15 years in federal prison, with no chance of parole for a decade. And when that sentence hit him like a wrecking ball in that Dallas courtroom, the man who once seemed untouchable literally collapsed face first into the defendant's table. Medics rushed in, oxygen masks, 7 minutes of pure chaos. This wasn't just a legal defeat. This was the complete annihilation of a carefully constructed lie that fooled millions of viewers worldwide. But here's what nobody saw coming. This isn't just about fake cars or forged documents. The federal investigation has uncovered a criminal enterprise so sophisticated, so deeply embedded in the heart of automotive culture, that it's sending shockwaves through every corner of the car world. Auction houses are scrambling to verify their inventories. Insurance companies are freezing policies left and right. Collectors who once bragged about owning Gas Monkey originals are now desperately trying to hide their purchases from public scrutiny. The most chilling part? Sources close to the investigation claim this is only the beginning. Federal prosecutors have seized terabytes of data, thousands of documents, and what insiders are calling the most damning evidence of systematic fraud in automotive history. We're talking about a secret room hidden inside Gas Monkey Garage that looked more like a forgery laboratory than a car shop. Industrial VIN stamping equipment, high-end document printers, and a master key that only Richard Rawlings possessed. The scope of this deception is absolutely mind-blowing. Multiple sources confirm that federal investigators discovered what they're calling the cage, a hidden room where Rawlings personally oversaw the transformation of ordinary classics into million-dollar rarities. Former employees have testified under oath about witnessing industrial-grade VIN stamping equipment that could replicate any manufacturer's numbering system. Computer workstations loaded with templates for every major automaker's documentation from the 1,960 seconds through the 1,980 seconds. This wasn't just creative storytelling for television. This was systematic fraud on an unprecedented scale. Documents obtained by federal investigators show that Rawlings had created an entire ecosystem of deception. Shell companies would purchase vehicles from Gas Monkey Garage at inflated prices, creating artificial market value. These same companies would then loan the vehicles to museums or car shows, generating tax benefits while maintaining the illusion of legitimate ownership. Meanwhile, the actual vehicles were being sold to unsuspecting collectors around the world. The international scope of this fraud is staggering, with evidence of fraudulent sales in 23 countries across 6 continents. The silence from Discovery Channel is deafening. Within 72 hours of the guilty verdict, every trace of Fast and Loud vanished from streaming platforms. Merchandise pulled from shelves, contracts terminated. It's like they're trying to erase Richard Rawlings from existence, but you can't erase the truth. People familiar with the federal investigation are whispering about audio recordings, secret meetings, and a paper trail that connects this fraud to some of the biggest names in automotive television. We're not just talking about one man's criminal enterprise anymore. We're talking about a systematic deception that may have infected the entire reality TV car culture. The internet has turned into a detective agency overnight. Millions of viewers are re-watching old Fast and Loud episodes, freeze-framing suspicious moments and analyzing every car flip with forensic precision. And what they're finding is absolutely earth-shattering. Cars that were supposedly barn finds appearing in multiple episodes with different backstories. VIN numbers that don't match manufacturer records. Build sheets so perfectly aged they look like museum pieces because they were literally manufactured to deceive. If you're already hooked by this insanity, smash that hype button because this story gets 10x more explosive. What we're about to reveal will change everything you thought you knew about the man who built an empire on lies. The TV show that was actually a marketing front for criminal activity, and the industry-wide cover-up that protected him for nearly a decade. Let's rewind to the beginning and understand how a small-time Dallas mechanic became the most notorious car criminal in American history. Because Richard Rawlings didn't start as a villain. He started as a dreamer with a genuine passion for classic American muscle cars and an almost supernatural ability to spot potential in rusted-out wrecks. Back in the early 2000s, Rawlings was just another guy with grease under his fingernails and big ambitions. He'd grown up around cars, learned to wrench from his father, and had that authentic Texas swagger that made people want to buy whatever he was selling. His early car flips were legitimate. He really did have an eye for finding diamonds in the rough, and his restoration work was solid, honest craftsmanship. The transformation began when television producers discovered him. Fast and Loud premiered in 2012, and suddenly Richard Rawlings wasn't just a local car guy anymore. He was a brand. The show's format was perfect for his personality, loud, brash, and entertaining, with just enough automotive knowledge to seem credible. Viewers ate it up. Here was a guy who made car restoration look like the coolest job in the world. But success has a way of corrupting even the most genuine people. Sources close to the early production reveal that Rawlings became obsessed with maintaining his image as the ultimate car finder. Every episode needed a miracle discovery. Every build had to be more spectacular than the last. And when reality couldn't keep up with the demands of television, that's when the line between entertainment and fraud began to blur. The warning signs were there from the beginning, but everyone was too caught up in the gas monkey phenomenon to notice. Veteran car collectors started whispering about Rawlings' finds being too good to be true. How could one man consistently discover museum-quality classics in forgotten barns and abandoned garages? The statistical probability was virtually impossible, but the TV cameras kept rolling and the money kept flowing. Dennis Collins, Rawlings' longtime friend and frequent co-star, later admitted he had concerns as early as 2014. Richard was finding cars that shouldn't exist, Collins told federal investigators. Rare variants that weren't in any production records. Cars with provenance stories that sounded like Hollywood scripts. But Collins, like everyone else in Rawlings' orbit, stayed quiet. The show was too successful, the money too good, and the consequences of speaking up too severe. The real Richard Rawlings was becoming increasingly paranoid and controlling. Former employees describe a man who went from being a fun-loving gearhead to someone who monitored every conversation, controlled every narrative, and demanded absolute loyalty from his team. The Gas Monkey Garage that viewers saw on television, a place of camaraderie and automotive passion, was becoming a pressure cooker of secrets and fear. By 2016, the operation had evolved into something far more sinister. What started as occasional creative storytelling about car histories had become systematic fraud. The secret room, what employees called the cage, was constructed during a supposed renovation of the Gas Monkey facility. On the building plans, it was listed as storage space. In reality, it became the nerve center of the most sophisticated automotive fraud scheme in history. 3 former employees have now testified under oath about what they witnessed in that hidden room. Industrial-grade VIN stamping equipment that could replicate any manufacturer's numbering system. Computer workstations loaded with templates for every major automaker's documentation from the 1,960 seconds through the 1,980 seconds. And Richard Rawlings, the man who once genuinely loved cars, personally overseeing the transformation of ordinary classics into million-dollar rarities. The psychological transformation was complete. Rawlings had become addicted to the deception itself. It wasn't just about money anymore, though the profits were staggering. It was about the power to create automotive history, to make collectors believe they were purchasing pieces of American heritage that never actually existed. He was playing God with car culture. And for nearly a decade, nobody could stop him. But every criminal empire has a fatal flaw, and Rawlings was his own ego. He couldn't resist bragging about his finds and couldn't help but push the boundaries of believability. The 1,967 Shelby GT 500 that would ultimately bring him down wasn't just another fraud. It was his masterpiece, his crown jewel, the ultimate expression of his criminal artistry. And it was so perfect, so impossibly rare, that it finally attracted the attention of people who had the power to investigate the truth behind the legend. What nobody realized at the time was that this single vehicle would unravel an entire criminal enterprise and expose the dark underbelly of automotive television that had been hiding in plain sight for years. But here's where it gets absolutely nuclear. The federal investigation didn't start with the cars at all. It began with something far more mundane and far more damaging. In late 2023, the IRS launched what they thought would be a routine audit of Gas Monkey Garage's quarterly financial reports. They were looking for simple discrepancies, maybe some creative expense reporting. What they found instead was a financial house of cards that would make Enron executives blush. The first red flag wasn't a fake VIN or a forged build sheet. It was a restaurant receipt, a $47,000 dinner bill at a high-end Dallas steakhouse listed under automotive parts and supplies. When IRS auditors dug deeper, they found a pattern of financial manipulation so brazen it was almost insulting to their intelligence. Private jet flights disguised as vehicle transport costs, luxury vacations written off as research trips, and most damning of all, personal vehicles owned by Rawlings himself being listed as inventory for sale vehicles that were never actually sold but generated massive tax deductions. But that was just the surface level. The real bombshell came when forensic accountants discovered a network of offshore accounts and shell companies that had been funneling money for years. We're talking about millions of dollars flowing through fake businesses with names like Heritage Automotive Consulting and Classic Car Authentication Services. These weren't legitimate companies. They were financial ghosts designed to launder the proceeds from fraudulent car sales. The smoking gun was a single VIN number that didn't exist in any manufacturer database. Vehicle identification number 7, R02S125436, was supposedly from a 1967 Shelby GT 500, one of the most valuable muscle cars ever produced. But when investigators ran that number through Ford's historical records, they found nothing. It was a ghost VIN, a number that should never have existed. And it was attached to a car that Richard Rawlings had sold for $1.2 million to a collector in Europe. The European buyer's story is what turned this from a financial investigation into a criminal case. Hans Muller, a wealthy German automotive enthusiast, had been following Gas Monkey Garage for years. He was exactly the kind of customer Rawlings targeted, passionate about American muscle cars, wealthy enough to afford the best, and trusting enough to believe in the Gas Monkey brand. When Rawlings offered him the crown jewel of his collection, Mueller didn't hesitate. The deception was masterful. Rawlings didn't just sell Mueller a car, he sold him a story. This wasn't just any GT 500. According to Rawlings, this was a factory prototype, one of only 3 ever built, with a racing pedigree that connected it to legendary drivers like Carroll Shelby himself. The documentation was flawless. The provenance seemed unquestionable, and the price tag of $1.2 million actually seemed reasonable for such a historically significant vehicle. But when Mueller tried to insure his prize, everything fell apart. European insurance companies are notoriously thorough when it comes to high-value classic cars. They don't just accept documentation at face value, they verify everything. The VIN check failed immediately. The build sheet raised red flags with Ford historians. And when experts examined the car itself, they made a devastating discovery. This wasn't a GT 500 at all. It was a standard 1967 Mustang that had been expertly modified to look like the real thing. The recorded phone calls between Mueller and Rawlings are absolutely damning. Federal prosecutors played them in court, and you could hear the desperation in Rawlings' voice as he tried to maintain the lie. "I guarantee you, Hans, this car is 100% authentic," Rawlings insisted. "I've staked my entire reputation on vehicles like this. I would never, ever sell you something that wasn't genuine." But he had done exactly that, and the evidence was overwhelming. The immediate fallout was swift and brutal. Within hours of Mueller's complaint reaching federal authorities, a joint task force was assembled involving the FBI, IRS Criminal Investigation Division, and the Department of Justice's Fraud Unit. This wasn't just about one fake car anymore. This was about a potential pattern of interstate and international fraud that could involve dozens of vehicles and millions of dollars. Social media exploded with the news. Car enthusiasts who had worshipped Richard Rawlings for over a decade suddenly found themselves questioning everything they thought they knew. Old Fast and Loud episodes were being dissected frame by frame. Collectors were pulling out their gas monkey purchases and examining them with new suspicion. And the automotive press, which had largely ignored the whispers about Rawlings for years, suddenly couldn't ignore the story anymore. The most shocking part was how quickly the house of cards began to collapse. Once federal investigators started pulling at the thread of that single fake VIN, they uncovered a web of deception that stretched back nearly 8 years. We're talking about dozens of vehicles with questionable provenance, hundreds of thousands of dollars in fraudulent documentation, and a criminal enterprise that had been hiding in plain sight on national television. The internet turned into detectives the moment news of the federal investigation broke. What started as casual speculation on car forums quickly evolved into a full-scale, crowdsourced investigation that would make professional law enforcement proud. Millions of Fast and Loud fans became amateur forensic analysts, rewatching every episode with the intensity of FBI agents looking for clues. The breakthrough came from an unlikely source, A22, a retired Ford assembly line worker named Robert Chen, who had been building Mustangs since 1965. Chen noticed something in a season 4 episode that everyone else had missed. Rawlings was showing off what he claimed was an original 1969 Boss 429 Mustang, supposedly one of only 857 ever built. But Chen spotted a detail that made his blood run cold. The engine bay had a casting mark that wasn't used until 1971. That's when I knew something was seriously wrong, Chen told investigators. Multiple sources confirmed that Chen's document became the roadmap for the federal investigation. FBI agents used his technical analysis to identify which gas monkey vehicles deserved closer scrutiny. Insurance investigators relied on his expertise to spot red flags in their own claims, and prosecutors used his findings to build their case against Rawlings and his co-conspirators. But Chen wasn't working alone. A network of automotive experts, historians, and enthusiasts had formed an informal task force dedicated to exposing the truth about Gas Monkey Garage. They called themselves the Authenticity Project, and their work was more thorough than anything the mainstream automotive press had ever attempted. Dr. Sarah Martinez, an automotive historian at the University of Michigan, contributed her expertise in factory documentation and production records. She discovered that several cars featured on Fast and Loud had build sheets that were too perfect aged paper that showed no signs of actual decades-old storage, ink that hadn't faded appropriately, and formatting that didn't match period-correct documentation standards. Former Gas Monkey employee Jake Morrison became the investigation's most valuable inside source. Morrison had worked in the shop from 2018 to 2021, and he'd seen things that haunted him long after he quit. Richard had this room that was always locked, Morrison testified. He called it his special projects area, but we all knew something weird was going on in there. The sounds coming out, industrial equipment, printers running constantly, and Richard would spend hours in there by himself. Morrison's testimony revealed the true scope of the operation. The secret room wasn't just for document forgery, it was a complete automotive identity theft center. Rawlings had acquired legitimate VIN plates from scrapped vehicles and was transplanting them onto restored cars to create false provenance. He had templates for every major manufacturer's documentation going back to 1962, and he had developed relationships with corrupt officials at various state DMVs who would register vehicles with questionable paperwork for the right price. The financial investigation uncovered an even more sophisticated scheme. Rawlings wasn't just selling fraudulent cars, he was using them as collateral for loans, insurance fraud, and tax evasion. A single fake vehicle might generate revenue streams from multiple sources: the initial sale, insurance claims for theft or damage, loan collateral, and tax deductions for charitable donations to automotive museums. Documents obtained by federal investigators show that Rawlings had created an entire ecosystem of fraud. Shell companies would purchase vehicles from Gas Monkey Garage at inflated prices, creating artificial market value. These same companies would then loan the vehicles to museums or car shows, generating tax benefits while maintaining the illusion of legitimate ownership. Meanwhile, the actual vehicles were being sold to unsuspecting collectors around the world. Behind the scenes, power struggles were tearing Gas Monkey Garage apart long before the federal investigation began. Dennis Collins, Rawlings' longtime friend and business partner, had been growing increasingly uncomfortable with the direction of the operation. Sources close to Collins reveal that he had confronted Rawlings multiple times about questionable vehicle documentation, only to be told that television requires a certain level of creative storytelling. The breaking point came in early 2023, when Collins discovered that his own name had been forged on authentication documents for a vehicle he'd never actually examined. "That's when I realized Richard wasn't just bending the truth for television," Collins told investigators. "He was committing serious crimes and using my reputation to legitimize them." Collins immediately distanced himself from Gas Monkey operations and began cooperating with federal authorities. Christy Brimberry, Gas Monkey's longtime office manager and the heart of the operation's public image, was reportedly devastated when she learned the truth. Employees describe her as being in complete shock during the FBI raid, repeatedly asking agents if there had been some mistake. Brimberry had genuinely believed in the Gas Monkey mission and had no knowledge of the criminal activities happening in the secret room. But that's not even the most shocking part. Just when investigators thought they understood the full scope of Richard Rawlings' criminal enterprise, a new piece of evidence emerged that changed everything. Hidden in the seized computer files was a folder labeled Insurance Projects, and what it contained was so damaging that it elevated the charges from fraud to racketeering. The insurance fraud scheme was breathtakingly audacious. Rawlings hadn't just been selling fake cars, he'd been staging their theft and destruction to collect insurance payouts. The process was diabolically simple. Create a fraudulent, high-value vehicle, sell it to a shell company he controlled, insure it for maximum value, then arrange for its theft or accidental destruction. The insurance companies, trusting the Gas Monkey brand and the vehicle's fabricated documentation, would pay out claims without extensive investigation. Federal prosecutors revealed that at least 17 vehicles had been subjected to this insurance fraud scheme over a 6-year period. The total insurance payouts exceeded $8.3 million, and in several cases, the same vehicle was stolen multiple times after being recovered and sold to different shell companies. New evidence emerges that this wasn't just Richard Rawlings operating alone. Phone records and financial documents reveal a network of co-conspirators that included corrupt insurance adjusters, complicit storage facility operators, and even law enforcement officials who were paid to file false police reports about vehicle thefts. This wasn't just fraud, it was organized crime. The key breakthrough came from an unlikely source, a disgruntled insurance adjuster named Michael Torres, who had been taking bribes to approve questionable claims. When Torres was arrested on unrelated charges, he immediately offered to cooperate with federal authorities in exchange for a reduced sentence. His testimony opened up an entirely new dimension of the investigation. Torres revealed that Rawlings had been systematically corrupting insurance industry professionals for years. Adjusters were paid $10,000 to $25,000 per fraudulent claim approval. Storage facility operators received $5,000 for each stage theft, and in at least 3 cases, local police officers were paid to file false theft reports without actually investigating the supposed crimes. The paper trail was extensive and damning. Bank records showed regular payments from Gas Monkey accounts to individuals who had no apparent connection to automotive restoration or television production. Key players' desperate responses began almost immediately after Torres started cooperating with authorities. Several insurance adjusters suddenly resigned from their positions and left the state. Storage facility operators began destroying records and claiming their security camera systems had malfunctioned, and Rawlings himself started making frantic phone calls to associates, warning them that the walls were closing in. Wiretapped conversations between Rawlings and his co-conspirators reveal a man in complete panic mode. In one particularly damaging recording, Rawlings can be heard telling an associate, "We need to make sure everyone stays quiet. If this thing unravels, we're all going to prison for a very long time." The conversation also includes explicit discussions about destroying evidence and intimidating potential witnesses. The most chilling revelation came from Torres's testimony about what he called the disposal protocol, when fraudulent vehicles became too hot to handle either because insurance companies were asking too many questions or because collectors were demanding authentication, Rawlings would arrange for their complete destruction, not just theft or damage, but total obliteration in industrial crushers or furnaces. Public opinion shifts dramatically as news of the insurance fraud scheme spreads across social media. Car enthusiasts who had been defending Rawlings as a victim of overzealous prosecution suddenly found themselves confronting evidence of systematic criminal behavior that went far beyond simple document forgery. The Gas Monkey brand, once synonymous with automotive passion and American craftsmanship, became toxic overnight. The evidence we're about to show you is so damning, you need to hype this video to help us expose the truth that powerful people want buried. The social media explosion was unprecedented. Gas Monkey fraud began trending worldwide within hours of the insurance scheme revelation. Automotive influencers who had collaborated with Rawlings scrambled to distance themselves from the brand. Collectors around the world began demanding forensic authentication of any vehicle with even the slightest connection to Gas Monkey Garage. The ripple effects extended far beyond just Richard Rawlings and his immediate associates. Insurance companies began reviewing every high-value classic car claim from the past decade. Auction houses implemented new authentication protocols, and automotive television producers started requiring extensive documentation and third-party verification for any vehicle featured on their shows. This isn't just about Richard Rawlings anymore. The federal investigation has exposed a cancer that's been eating away at the heart of automotive culture for nearly a decade. What started as one man's criminal enterprise has revealed systematic problems that reach into every corner of the classic car world, from prestigious auction houses to mainstream television networks to the insurance companies that protect collectors' most prized possessions. Barrett-Jackson, the most prestigious automotive auction house in America, went into full crisis mode within 24 hours of the federal charges being announced. CEO Craig Jackson called an emergency board meeting and immediately launched an internal investigation into every vehicle that had passed through their auctions with any connection to Gas Monkey Garage. What they found was absolutely terrifying. At least 23 vehicles with questionable Gas Monkey provenance had been sold through Barrett-Jackson auctions between 2015 and 2023, generating over $18 million in sales. These weren't just any cars, they were marquee lots, the kind of vehicles that automotive journalists write feature stories about and collectors fight bidding wars to own. Industry-wide panic spread like wildfire through the collector car community. Hagerty Insurance, which insures more classic cars than any other company in America, immediately froze all claims related to vehicles with Gas Monkey connections. Their forensic team began what they called the largest authentication review in automotive insurance history, examining over 200 policies that could potentially be affected by the fraud. The financial implications were staggering. Conservative estimates suggested that fraudulent Gas Monkey vehicles had generated over $75 million in sales across all auction houses, private sales, and insurance claims. But the real damage went far deeper than just money. It was about trust, authenticity, and the very foundation of what makes classic cars valuable. Television networks scrambled to distance themselves from the automotive reality show genre that had made Richard Rawlings famous. Discovery Channel not only pulled Fast and Loud from all platforms, but also canceled 3 other car-focused shows that were in development. History Channel quietly shelved plans for a new automotive restoration series, and Netflix removed several car-related documentaries from their streaming service while they reviewed their content for potential connections to fraudulent activities. The cultural impact was perhaps even more significant than the financial damage. Other celebrities and automotive personalities found themselves under intense scrutiny as the investigation expanded. Wayne Carini from Chasing Classic Cars issued a preemptive statement, distancing himself from Rawlings and emphasizing his own authentication procedures. Mike Brewer from Wheeler Dealers hired a crisis management firm after internet detectives began analyzing his show for potential inconsistencies. Even Jay Leno, whose reputation for automotive authenticity was previously unquestioned, felt compelled to address the scandal during a Tonight Show monologue. The most shocking revelation came when federal investigators discovered that the fraud had infected automotive museums and educational institutions. The National Corvette Museum in Bowling Green, Kentucky, had accepted a donation of a supposedly rare 1967 L88 Corvette from one of Rawlings' shell companies. The donation had generated a $400,000 tax deduction and significant publicity for both the museum and Gas Monkey Garage. But authentication experts now believe the car was a standard 427 Corvette that had been modified with fake L88 components and documentation. The Peterson Automotive Museum in Los Angeles faced an even more embarrassing situation. They had featured a Gas Monkey restored 1970 Plymouth Superbird in a major exhibition about NASCAR history, complete with educational materials describing the car's racing heritage and cultural significance. Cultural and social implications of the scandal extended far beyond the automotive world. The fraud had crossed borders and infected classic car markets around the world. European collectors who had purchased Gas Monkey vehicles found themselves unable to register or insure their cars once the authentication issues became known. Japanese collectors who had paid premium prices for what they believed were authentic American muscle cars discovered they owned elaborate fakes with no legal recourse due to international jurisdiction issues. Diplomatic tensions even emerged when several foreign governments demanded that the U.S. State Department assist in recovering fraudulent vehicles that had been exported from America. The German government, responding to pressure from defrauded collectors like Hans Müller, formally requested that American authorities help facilitate the return of vehicles that had been sold under false pretenses. Similar requests came from collectors in the United Kingdom, Australia, and Japan. The classic car market itself began showing signs of serious instability. Prices for muscle cars from the 1962 and 1970, the exact vehicles that Gas Monkey Garage had specialized in, dropped by an average of 15% within 6 months of the scandal breaking. Collectors became paranoid about authentication, demanding extensive documentation and third-party verification for even routine purchases. Where everyone stands now is a landscape of devastation that continues to evolve daily. Richard Rawlings sits in federal prison, serving the first year of his 15-year sentence. But even behind bars, his criminal empire continues to generate new revelations and legal complications. Federal prosecutors have made it clear that the investigation is far from over, with new charges and co-conspirators being identified on a regular basis. The most recent development came just last week when federal agents raided a storage facility in Nevada that had been secretly controlled by one of Rawlings' shell companies. Inside, they discovered what investigators are calling the graveyard. Dozens of partially destroyed vehicles that were apparently being prepared for the disposal protocol we mentioned earlier. Among the wreckage were components from cars that had been reported stolen years ago, suggesting that the insurance fraud scheme was even more extensive than originally believed. Dennis Collins, once Rawlings' closest friend and business partner, has become the prosecution's star witness. His testimony has been devastating, revealing not just the mechanics of the fraud, but also the psychological manipulation that Rawlings used to maintain loyalty among his associates. Latest developments and updates continue to shock even seasoned federal investigators. Just 3 days ago, a new witness came forward with evidence that could expand the criminal charges even further. Maria Santos, a former bookkeeper for one of Rawlings' shell companies, revealed the existence of what she calls the International Pipeline, a sophisticated network for moving fraudulent vehicles overseas before their fake documentation could be discovered. Santos's testimony reveals that Rawlings had established relationships with corrupt customs officials at multiple U.S. ports, paying them to expedite export paperwork and avoid thorough inspections of outbound vehicles. The scheme was so sophisticated that fraudulent cars were often shipped with legitimate vehicles to create cover, making it nearly impossible for authorities to track which cars were authentic and which were elaborate fakes. The most damning evidence Santos provided was a ledger showing payments to officials at the Port of Long Beach, Port of Miami, and Port of Houston. These weren't small bribes. We're talking about $50,000 to $100,000 payments to ensure that specific vehicle shipments avoided detailed scrutiny. The implications are staggering. If customs officials were being paid to look the other way, how many other criminal enterprises were using similar methods to export stolen or fraudulent goods? Ongoing legal and professional consequences continue to multiply faster than anyone can track. the civil lawsuits are exploding exponentially. Hans Mueller, the German collector who purchased the fake Shelby GT 500, has filed a $15 million lawsuit not just against Rawlings but against Discovery Channel, Barrett-Jackson, and the insurance company that authenticated the vehicle. His legal team argues that the entire automotive entertainment industry was complicit in creating an environment where fraud could flourish. Discovery Channel faces its own legal nightmare, as multiple class action lawsuits have been filed by viewers who claim they were defrauded by the network's promotion of what they now know was criminal activity. The lawsuits argue that Discovery not only failed to verify the authenticity of vehicles featured on Fast and Loud, but actively promoted fraudulent content for profit. Legal experts suggest that the network could face hundreds of millions of dollars in damages if the lawsuits are successful. Your hype points are literally helping us fund more investigations like this. Hit that button if you want us to keep digging deeper. The psychological toll on Rawlings himself has become increasingly apparent during recent court appearances. Gone is the swaggering, confident television personality who once commanded rooms with his larger-than-life presence. Court observers describe a man who appears to have aged decades in just months, speaking in barely audible whispers and requiring assistance to walk to the defendant's table. Prison sources report that Rawlings has been placed in protective custody after receiving multiple threats from other inmates who lost money investing in gas monkey-related ventures. What's coming next is going to make everything we've revealed so far look like just the opening act of a much larger drama. Federal prosecutors have made it clear that Richard Rawlings was not operating in isolation. He was part of a network of automotive fraud that may involve some of the biggest names in car television, auction houses, and even legitimate automotive manufacturers who may have been complicit in creating the environment where this fraud could flourish. The next phase of the investigation is focusing on what prosecutors are calling the enablers, individuals and organizations who may not have directly participated in creating fraudulent vehicles, but who helped legitimize them through authentication services, auction sales, or media coverage. Sources close to the investigation suggest that several high-profile automotive personalities are currently under federal scrutiny, though no additional charges have been filed yet. Barrett-Jackson's internal investigation has reportedly uncovered evidence that some of their own authentication experts may have been compromised. The auction house has hired a team of former FBI investigators to conduct what they're calling the most comprehensive review of auction practices in automotive history. Early findings suggest that the authentication process for high-value vehicles was far less rigorous than the public believed, with some experts approving vehicles based on documentation that would never pass forensic scrutiny. The most terrifying possibility is that the gas monkey fraud was just one node in a much larger network of automotive deception. Federal investigators are now looking at patterns of suspicious vehicle sales across multiple television shows, auction houses, and restoration shops. Unresolved mysteries and questions continue to multiply as the investigation deepens. How many legitimate classic cars were destroyed to provide components for fraudulent builds? How many corrupt officials in various government agencies were taking bribes to facilitate the fraud? And most importantly, how many other Richard Rawlings are out there, still operating under the cover of television fame and automotive passion? The blockchain authentication movement is gaining momentum as collectors and institutions search for ways to prevent future fraud. Several companies are developing systems that would create permanent, tamper-proof records of vehicle authenticity, maintenance history, and ownership transfers. While the technology is promising, implementing it across the entire classic car market would require unprecedented cooperation between manufacturers, auction houses, insurance companies, and government agencies. Insurance companies are fundamentally changing how they approach classic car coverage. New policies require extensive documentation, third-party authentication, and, in some cases, DNA-level analysis of paint and materials to verify authenticity. Potential future revelations could be even more shocking than what we've already uncovered. Federal investigators have seized over 50 terabytes of data from gas monkey operations, and they've only analyzed a fraction of it so far. Each new piece of evidence seems to reveal additional layers of deception and additional co-conspirators who help maintain the fraud. The most chilling possibility is that some of the destroyed vehicles in Rawlings' disposal protocol may have been legitimate automotive treasures, one-of-a-kind prototypes, historically significant race cars, or irreplaceable pieces of automotive heritage that were crushed to cover up the fraud. If true, the cultural loss would be incalculable, representing the destruction of automotive history that can never be recovered. International law enforcement is now treating automotive fraud as a serious transnational crime. Interpol has established a new task force specifically focused on fraudulent vehicle trafficking, and several countries are considering new laws that would make it easier to prosecute automotive fraud cases that cross international borders. The Rawlings case has become a template for how these investigations should be conducted. The psychological impact on the automotive community will likely last for generations. Young enthusiasts who grew up watching Fast and Loud and dreaming of finding their own barn finds now face the reality that much of what they believed was authentic was actually elaborate fiction. This investigation is far from over, and we're committed to following every lead and exposing every aspect of this criminal enterprise. The automotive community deserves the truth, no matter how painful it might be. The classic car hobby is built on passion, history, and authenticity values that Richard Rawlings betrayed for profit and fame. We're about to reveal the most shocking part, but first, if this expose has blown your mind, give it the hype it deserves. Your support through hype points and engagement is literally helping fund continued investigation into automotive fraud. Every time you interact with content like this, you're supporting independent journalism that holds powerful people accountable for their actions. The mainstream automotive press ignored the warning signs about Gas Monkey Garage for years, but the community of enthusiasts and independent investigators refuse to stay silent. Subscribe and stay tuned because this story is evolving daily. Federal investigators continue to uncover new evidence, new co-conspirators are being identified, and the full scope of the automotive fraud network is still being revealed. We'll be here to break down every development, analyze every piece of evidence, and hold everyone involved accountable for their actions. The automotive community will emerge from this scandal stronger and more vigilant than ever before.